Good morning. Welcome to this online service of Neshoba Unitarian Universalist Church in Cordova, Tennessee. I am the Reverend Beth Lefever, pleased and privileged as always to serve as the minister of this congregation, and I am so very glad that you were able to join with us this morning. Our opening words are by Kaan from the hymn. Break not the circle of enabling love where people grow forgiven and forgiving. Break not the circle, make it wider still, till it embraces all the living. Let us join together in worship. And now Cindy Murray will light our chalice.
Hello, happy 4th of July. So as we light this chalice today, let's reflect on the words from the Declaration of Independence. In the second paragraph says that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So let it be so. Let it be so that all people, not just men, have these unalienable rights, that we're all equal, no matter the color of our skin, that what pronoun we choose, what we believe in. Let it be so that we fight for this, fight that everybody has equality and equity in these United States of America. So happy 4th of July. Let it be so. Please join me as we read the Affirmation of Covenant. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is our sacrament, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve human need, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other and with God.
Henry David Thoreau was a real person who lived in Concord, Massachusetts more than 150 years ago. He loved to take long walks through the woods and fields and write about the plants and animals he saw there. In his pockets, he carried a pencil and paper, a jackknife, some string, a spyglass, a magnifying glass, and a flute. He could easily walk 30 miles a day with an old music book under his arm for pressing plants and a walking stick that was notched for measuring things. These quiet walks gave Henry time to think, and he shared his ideas with other friends and writers who were neighbors in Concord. And eventually he wrote a book called Walden, where he wrote down a lot of his thoughts. This book is really popular among Unitarian Universalists. One of the things he wrote about in his book was a conversation he had with a friend about the best way to go to Fitchburg, a neighboring town, and see the country. And here's how it might have gone. Henry Hikes to Fitchburg by D.B. Johnson. One summer day, Henry and his friend decided to go to Fitchburg to see the country. "I'll walk," said Henry. "It's the fastest way to travel." "I'll work," said his friend, "until I have money to buy a ticket to ride the train to Fitchburg. We'll see who gets there first." Henry's friend waved. "Enjoy your walk," he said. Henry started down the road to Fitchburg. "Enjoy your work," he called back. Henry's friend filled the wood box in Mrs. Alcott's kitchen, and she gave him 10 cents. Henry hopped from rock to rock across Sudbury River. His friend swept out the post office for 5 cents. Henry notched a walking stick, 25 miles to Fitchburg. Henry's friend pulled all the weeds in Mr. Hawthorne's garden for 15 cents. Henry put ferns and flowers in a book and pressed them. His friend painted the fence in front of the courthouse for 10 cents. Henry walked on the stone walls. Henry's friend moved all the bookshelves in Mr. Emerson's study for 15 cents. Henry climbed a tree 18 miles to Fitchburg. His friend carried water for the cows grazing on the village green. Henry made a raft and paddled up the Neshoba River. His friend carried flour from the mill to the town baker. Henry found a honey tree. Henry's friend ran to the station to buy a ticket to Fitchburg for 90 cents. Henry jumped into a pond, chased by the honeybees. 7 miles to Fitchburg. His friend sat on the train in a tangle of people. Henry ate his way through a tangle of blackberry bushes. Henry's friend got off the train at the Fitchburg station just as the sun was setting. Henry took a shortcut. Still 1 more mile to Fitchburg. Henry's friend was sitting in the moonlight when Henry arrived. The train was faster, he said. Henry took a small pail from his pack. I know, he smiled. I stopped for blackberries. Who do you think had the better trip to Fitchburg?
In acknowledgement of our relative privilege in a world of want, we bring our gifts to the altar. In our deeply felt imperative to be a continued and insistent presence in a world so very much in need of what we are about, we bring our gifts to the altar. In our passion for transcendence and inextinguishable light, we bring our gifts to the altar in this, our sacred ritual of the morning Sunday offering. My first reading is by Billy Taylor and Dick Dallas from the hymn, I Wish I Knew How, which became an anthem in the civil rights movement of the 1960s. This is excerpted. I wish I could share all the love in my heart, remove all the bars that still keep us apart. I wish you could know what it means to be me. Then you'd see and agree, everyone should be free. Then you'd see and agree, everyone should be free. I wish I could give all I'm longing to give. I wish I could live like I'm longing to live. I wish I could do all the things I can do, though I'm way overdue. I'd be starting anew. Though I'm way overdue, I'd be starting anew. My second reading is by Robert Kennedy, adapted. It is from numberless diverse acts of courage and belief that human history is shaped. Each time a person stands up for an ideal, or acts to improve the lots of others, or strikes out against injustice, they send forth a tiny ripple of hope. And finally, by singer-songwriter, the late Woody Guthrie. This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me. Happy, happy 4th of July. It is a day to celebrate, if for no other reason than that, unlike last year when we were in serious lockdown, we can now, with just a bit of caution, get together with family and friends for long overdue parties and picnics. Yay. But there are other reasons to celebrate this national holiday, which we have been celebrating actually since 1777, when Philadelphia held the first festivities just a year after the Declaration of Independence was signed. If you remember your history, the Congress representing those first 13 colonies had declared independence from Great Britain by vote on July 2nd. It took 2 additional days, however, for revisions to be completed by Thomas Jefferson, who originally drafted the document, and his committee members, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and William Livingston. And then the Continental Congress adopted the final version, and the celebrations began. The colonists were celebrating for a number of reasons. They had originally left England because they did not want to be a part, or forced to be a part, of the Church of England. They wanted religious freedom. That's a good thing, isn't it? Also then, they wanted to be free of the rule and taxation of Great Britain. Great Britain still had control over the colonies, even though the colonies had no voice or vote in matters affecting them. Taxation without representation was a major, major complaint. They wanted freedom, the colonists. They wanted to occupy and rule their own land, their own country, their own nation, to rule their own people. And so, the war, the victory, the independence, the freedom, and the celebrations. The celebrations did not continue without a few hiccups here and there, though. The holiday became complicated during and especially after the Civil War, when citizens' ideals and values differed colossally and confrontationally. After the war ended, many angry and frustrated white Southerners discontinued their celebrations for a number of years, while Northerners celebrated more ardently, fueled by the pleasure of their victory in the war between the states. Nationhood is complicated. Democracy is complicated. People are complicated. Does it go without saying? It goes without saying. It got a lot more complicated for many of us when we became aware, or at least more starkly aware, that our black siblings were really not free. Though technically freed from slavery by the Emancipation Proclamation signed by President Lincoln in September of 1862, with the cause furthered by the defeat of the Confederate armies in the spring of 1865, slavery was slow to be banished, and when it was, more or less, gave way to violent race-based persecution, prejudice, and hatred that has continued in one form or another, to one extent or another, throughout the history of our country. Even Lincoln appeared to believe that blacks were somehow less than, stating in his final speech that voting rights should be limited to, quote, very intelligent, unquote, African American men and those who had served in the military. As we know, voting rights are still up for grab in states fearing the black vote, which tends to be more liberal and more Democrat. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, at least 61 bills with restrictive provisions are moving through 18 state legislatures at this time. More specifically, 31 have passed at least one chamber, while another 30 have had some sort of committee action, for example, a hearing, an amendment, or a committee vote. Overall, lawmakers have introduced at least 389 restrictive bills in 48 states in the 2021 legislative sessions. All that aside, and I hesitate to say that because we should not put any of that aside, even for a minute, but on another note, I was thrilled, as I know many of you were, when President Biden signed a law making Juneteenth Day a federal holiday. That's when I came up with the title for today's sermon, Now We Can Really Celebrate. Juneteenth Day commemorates the end of slavery in the United States and marks the day, June 19th, 1865, when news of the emancipation reached people in the deepest parts of the former Confederacy in Galveston, Texas. It took 2 years for the slaves of Galveston to receive word of their freedom from slavery. Juneteenth has been celebrated ever since then, and even though most, although not all, most states had begun to recognize its observance, it was not a federal holiday until just this year. Yay, now we really can celebrate. And I do. It has been a long time coming, far, far too long in coming, and I celebrate the progress we have made. However, and darn, I hate it that I have to insert a however here, but I can't look at the totality of the meaning of Independence Day without addressing this. Many of us have seen the reports of 751 unmarked graves at the site of a former residential school in Saskatchewan, Canada. This following the discovery just weeks before of the remains of 215 children in a similar residential school in British Columbia. These are suspected to be the graves and remains of Indigenous children and youth in Canada. According to a BBC report, quote, "The Marival Indian Residential School was operated by the Roman Catholic Church from 1899 to 1997 in southeastern Saskatchewan. It was one of more than 130 compulsory boarding schools funded by the Canadian government and run by religious authorities during the 19th and 20th centuries with the aim of assimilating Indigenous youth. It is estimated," the BBC continues, "that 6,000 children died while attending these schools, due in large part to the squalid health conditions inside. Students were often housed in poorly built, poorly heated, and unsanitary facilities. Between 1863 and 1998, more than 150,000 Indigenous children were taken from their families and placed in these schools throughout Canada. The children were often not allowed to speak their language or to practice their culture, and many were mistreated or abused," unquote. Why do I bring up this Canadian travesty in discussing our own Independence Day? Well, because of course it happened here too. We had similar residential assimilationist schools in the United States from 1860 to 1978. There were reportedly more than 350 government-funded and often church-run Indian boarding schools across the United States in the 19th and 20th centuries. Indian children were forcibly abducted by government agents, sent to schools hundreds of miles away, and beaten, starved, or otherwise abused when they spoke their language, their native language. Our entire history regarding the Indigenous people in our country is horrendous and appalling, and is a history I am, correctly I think, ashamed of. Reading about the Canadian atrocities just brings back to my conscious awareness that which I would rather forget, more of the horrors of our own national history. And yet, and this is a huge and yet, though we as a species are a flawed people, living flawed lives in a flawed country and world, there is a part of us who are not flawed. The flaws are only part of us. We are also a loving, caring, creative species. And let me be specific to the United States here. We care. We struggle. We work. We fight for right. We don't all agree on what right is, and that causes us all kinds of anxiety and heartache, but we do try, most of us, most of the time. It's often forward one step and back two, but sometimes it's the reverse. And sometimes we make the occasional leaps and bounds toward goodness. And our ideals, the ideals upon which our country was founded, the ideals toward which we strive and groan and ache and strive some more, they are really worth the work required to make them real. They are really worth celebrating. So let's heartily cheer Independence Day today, heartily celebrate it with the joy of all that we are and the promise and the hope of all that we yet will be. Amen. And now let us move into a time of meditation, reflection, and prayer. Let us quiet ourselves, releasing the demands and distractions of the day. Let us breathe comfortably, serene and relaxed as we consider these words from the Buddhist tradition. May every creature abound in well-being and peace. May every living being, weak or strong, the long and the small, the short and the medium-sized, the mean and the great. May every living being, seen or unseen, those dwelling far off, those living nearby, those already born, those waiting to be born, may all attain inward peace. Let no one deceive another. Let no one despise another in any situation. Let no one, from antipathy or hatred, wish evil to anyone at all. Just as a mother with her own life protects her only child from hurt, so within yourself, foster a limitless concern for every living creature. Display a heart of boundless love for all the world in all its height and depth and broad extent. Love unrestrained, without hate or enmity. Then, as you stand or walk, sit or lie, until overcome by drowsiness, devote your mind entirely to this. It is known as living the life divine. Amen. And until next week, blessed, blessed be.
O star of truth, down shining through clouds of doubt and fear, I ask beneath thy guidance my pathway may appear. However long the journey, however hard it be, though I be lone and weary, lead on, I follow thee. I know thy blessed radiance can never lead astray, though ancient creed and custom may point another